The rain-slicked streets of Brooklyn blurred into a watercolor haze as Samuel's phone buzzed like a dying heartbeat in his pocket. He yanked it out, heart slamming against his ribs, only to see the message: "I can't do this anymore. We're done." No explanation, no goodbye, just the cold finality of 4 words from the man he'd loved for 3 years, the one who'd promised forever under the flickering neon of a Coney Island Ferris wheel. As thunder cracked overhead, Samuel crumpled to the wet pavement, the downpour mixing with hot tears, whispering to the empty night, "What the hell did I do wrong this time?" In the dim glow of his one-bedroom walk-up, Samuel replayed the last fight in his mind like a scratched vinyl record, accusations flying about his emotional walls. His inability to commit fully after his parents' messy divorce had left him scarred at 18. But this ghosting felt like betrayal on steroids, a knife twist he hadn't seen coming. He scrolled through old texts, photos of lazy Sundays in bed, hikes upstate where they'd carved their initials into a birch tree like lovesick teenagers. At 28, Samuel had thought he'd finally found his anchor in Alex, a rugged graphic designer with a laugh that lit up rooms and eyes that saw straight through his bullshit. Now, Alex was gone, and the apartment echoed with the silence of a life unraveling. Desperate for distraction, Samuel fired up Grindr that same stormy night, thumbs swiping through profiles like a man drowning grasping at driftwood. That's when he matched with Evan. No bio, just a single photo, a shadowed silhouette against a Manhattan skyline, broad shoulders in a fitted black tee, a hint of a smirk playing on full lips. "Hey, stranger. Rain making you crazy too?" Evan's message popped up instantly, casual but laced with an undercurrent of heat that made Samuel's pulse quicken. They chatted for hours, Evan's words sharp and witty, peeling back layers Samuel hadn't shared with anyone since Alex. By dawn, as the storm broke into a hesitant sunrise, Samuel was hooked, the stranger's voice on a late-night call rough like aged whiskey, promising nothing but everything. Their first meetup was at a dive bar in Williamsburg, the kind with sticky floors and jukebox tunes from the 90s that made you feel like you could rewrite your heartaches. Samuel arrived early, nursing a cheap IPA, his nerves jangling like loose change. When Evan walked in, time stuttered, tall, with tousled black hair that begged to be ruffled, olive skin glowing under the bar's amber lights, and those eyes, a deep green that locked onto Samuel like a secret code. "You look even better in person," Evan said, sliding onto the stool beside him, his knee brushing Samuel's in a spark that shot straight to his core. They talked for hours, Evan's stories of growing up in foster homes across Jersey, the raw ache of never knowing his roots, mirroring Samuel's own buried pain from a father who'd bailed and a mother who'd spiraled into pills after. It was effortless, electric, like they'd been orbiting each other for years. By the end of the night, they were stumbling into Samuel's apartment, lips crashing in a kiss that tasted like rain and redemption. Evan's hands were everywhere, strong, sure, mapping Samuel's body like uncharted territory, drawing gasps and moans that echoed off the brick walls. "God, I've wanted this since your first message," Evan murmured against Samuel's neck, his breath hot and ragged. Samuel arched into him, surrendering to the rush, the way Evan's touch erased the ghost of Alex's abandonment. They moved together in a frenzy of tangled sheets and whispered confessions, bodies slick and urgent, until exhaustion claimed them in a heap of limbs and quiet breaths. As dawn crept in, Samuel traced the faint scar on Evan's collarbone, a jagged line from a childhood accident, and felt something shift inside him, a fragile hope blooming in the ruins of his heart. Weeks blurred into a whirlwind romance that felt ripped from an indie flick, stolen afternoons in Central Park, where they'd feed each other falafel from street carts and debate the merits of Springsteen versus Dylan under the dappled shade of ancient oaks. Evan had a way of making Samuel laugh until his sides ached, recounting tales of botched tattoos in dimly lit parlors or midnight drives along the Jersey Turnpike with nothing but a six-pack and a dream. But beneath the charm lurked shadows. Evan's reluctance to meet Samuel's friends, his vague excuses about family holidays, the way he'd tense whenever Samuel mentioned his own mom, Lila, a resilient nurse who'd clawed her way through single motherhood in Queens. One crisp October evening, as leaves turned the city into a fiery canvas, Samuel decided to push. They were curled on the couch, Evan's head in his lap, fingers idly stroking through that inky hair. "Tell me about your folks," Samuel said softly, his voice laced with the vulnerability of someone who'd learned to tiptoe around old wounds. Evan stilled, his green eyes clouding like a sudden squall. "Not much to tell. Mom ditched when I was a baby. Some story about a one-night stand in Atlantic City. Dad, foster roulette till I aged out." He forced a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. Samuel leaned down, pressing a kiss to his temple. "Hey, you're stuck with me now. That's gotta count for something." Evan pulled him closer, their bodies aligning in that perfect puzzle fit, and for a moment, the past dissolved into the heat of their shared breath. But cracks began to spiderweb through the idyll. Samuel's best friend, Mia, a no-nonsense barista with a pixie cut and a PhD in calling out bullshit, eyed Evan warily at their first group hang at a Bushwick speakeasy. "He's hot, Sammy, but intense, like he's hiding a body in the basement." Samuel brushed it off with a laugh, high on the novelty of love that didn't demand perfection. Yet doubts gnawed at him during quiet nights, when Evan's phone would light up with anonymous text he'd silence without a word. And then there was the photo Samuel found tucked in Evan's wallet. A faded Polaroid of a toddler with Evan's eyes, grinning toothlessly beside a woman who looked eerily like. No, it couldn't be. Samuel shoved the thought down, chalking it up to paranoia born of heartbreak. Thanksgiving loomed like a family obligation Samuel dreaded, his mom Lila insisting on the full spread, turkey brined in her secret recipe, cranberry relish that burned your tongue just right, and enough pie to induce a coma. Evan begged off with a work trip to Chicago, but Samuel sensed the lie in the way his jaw clenched. "Come on, it'll be fun. Mom's dying to meet you. She's got this sixth sense for good eggs." Evan hesitated, then nodded, a shadow crossing his face that Samuel mistook for nerves. The drive to Queens was charged with anticipation, Evan's hand heavy on Samuel's thigh as they navigated holiday traffic snarled like festive barbed wire. Lila's brownstone smelled of sage and simmering gravy, a warm beacon in the chill November dusk. She enveloped Samuel in a hug that smelled of lavender and home, her silver-streaked hair escaping a loose bun. "My boy," she murmured, eyes crinkling with that fierce love that had carried them through lean years. Then she turned to Evan, and the world tilted. Lila froze, her face draining of color as if she'd seen a ghost. "Evan," she whispered, hand flying to her mouth. Evan's eyes widened in mirror shock, the air thickening with unspoken thunder. Samuel laughed nervously. "You two know each other?" But the silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, until Lila's knees buckled, and she collapsed into a kitchen chair, tears carving rivers down her cheeks. "Oh God, my son." The revelation hit like a freight train derailing in slow motion. Lila's story spilled out in fractured sobs. 40 years ago, a whirlwind affair in a smoky Atlantic City casino with a drifter named Marco, a night of passion that left her pregnant and alone when he vanished at dawn. She'd given the baby up for adoption, the shame too crushing for her devout Catholic family to bear, burying the secret deeper than any grave. Evan, it turned out, had pieced together fragments from foster records just months ago, a birth mother's name, Lila Esposito, in a city that matched. He'd come to New York chasing ghosts, never dreaming he'd find not just a mother, but a lover who shared her blood. Samuel reeled, the room spinning in a nauseating carousel of betrayal and horror. "You knew?" he choked out, staring at Evan, who looked as shattered as a dropped mirror. "No, God, no, Sammy. I swear, the photo. I found it last spring, but I didn't connect it till." His voice cracked, hands outstretched in plea. But the damage was etched in stone. Every kiss, every tender touch now poisoned by the incestuous shadow lurking beneath. Lila wept apologies into her apron, her hands trembling as she clutched a faded locket, Evan's tiny footprint pressed inside, a relic of the son she'd surrendered. Nights fractured into insomnia's grip, Samuel pacing the apartment like a caged wolf, Evan's belongings a minefield he couldn't navigate. They tried to talk, raw, gut-wrenching conversations over cold coffee at dawn, but words failed against the tidal wave of revulsion and grief. "I love you," Evan whispered one midnight, his body curled fetal on the couch, eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "This doesn't change that. We're not. We can't be blood, not really." But Samuel recoiled, the intimacy they'd built now a grotesque parody, every memory tainted. He stormed out into the biting December wind, wandering the frozen streets until his fingers numbed, screaming silent questions at the indifferent stars. How could fate be so cruel, twisting love into abomination? The high tide of conflict crashed during a blistering argument in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge, holiday lights twinkling mockingly overhead like cruel confetti. Evan, desperate to salvage the wreckage, grabbed Samuel's arm. "Fight for us. Don't let this define us." Samuel wrenched free, fury boiling over. "Define us? You slept in my bed knowing, suspecting, something was off. That's betrayal, Evan. Pure and simple." Accusations flew like shrapnel. Evan's secrecy a deliberate wound, Samuel's denial a complicit blindness. Punches weren't thrown, but words landed harder, drawing blood that no bandage could staunch. Evan staggered back, face crumpling. "I came here to find family, not destroy one." He turned and vanished into the night, leaving Samuel adrift in the echo of his own rage. Christmas came cloaked in forced cheer, Lila's table laden but spirits hollow. She and Evan met in tentative coffee shop huddles, mother and long-lost son navigating the chasm of decades with halting stories and shared silences. Samuel watched from afar, a reluctant bridge in a family forged from fracture. Jealousy gnawed at him, irrational and sharp. Evan blooming under Lila's gaze, the son she'd mourned in quiet vigils, while Samuel felt sidelined, the lover reduced to collateral damage. Yet in stolen glances across the room, sparks lingered, Evan's hand brushing his in the kitchen, a thumb tracing circles that whispered we're still here. The pull was magnetic, forbidden fruit dangling just out of reach, tempting Samuel to damn the consequences. New Year's Eve dawned with a fragile truce. They gathered at Times Square, the crush of revelers a chaotic symphony of hope and horns. Evan pulled Samuel into a shadowed alley, away from the madness, his breath fogging the air between them. "I can't lose you both," he said, voice raw as stripped wire. "But if staying means hurting you." Samuel's resolve cracked, tears freezing on his lashes. He cupped Evan's face, thumbs wiping away the damp tracks. "I don't know how to love you without this poison." Their lips met in a kiss that was equal parts salvation and sin, fierce, lingering, a defiant claim against the universe's cruel joke. Fireworks erupted overhead, but in that moment, the real explosion was internal, a love too deep to sever, too twisted to embrace fully. Spring unfurled tentatively, cherry blossoms dusting the paths of Prospect Park like hesitant apologies. Therapy became their lifeline, separate sessions bleeding into joint ones, where a soft-spoken counselor named Raj unpacked the knots of trauma and taboo. Samuel confronted his abandonment issues, the fear that love was always a prelude to loss. Evan grieved the childhood stolen, the identity pieced from puzzle scraps. Lila joined sporadically, her presence a balm and a burr, sharing letters she'd written to a baby she'd never held, forging bonds that mended in fits and starts. Yet the romantic ember between Samuel and Evan smoldered low, banked by caution. Nights spent talking on the fire escape rather than tangled in sheets, hands linked but bodies distant. The true climax crested in May, under a relentless downpour that mirrored their first storm-swept connection. Evan had uncovered more from adoption files. Marco, their shared father, alive and estranged in a Philly suburb, a man who'd fathered children across state lines like careless graffiti. The confrontation was inevitable, a road trip south, Samuel at the wheel, tension thick as humidity. They found Marco in a dingy trailer, graying and grizzled, nursing a beer amid faded photos of lives half-lived. "Twins?" he barked, eyes narrowing at the mirror images of youth he'd squandered. No remorse, just deflection, stories of hard knocks and harder choices that rang hollow. Rage ignited. Evan hurled accusations like grenades, Samuel's fists clenched white-knuckled on the doorframe. Marco's final barb, "You queers always complicate shit," snapped the last threat. They fled into the night, car hydroplaning through sheets of rain. Evan's sobs a counterpoint to the wiper's frantic rhythm. "He's nothing to us," Samuel growled, pulling over at a deserted rest stop. In the dashboard's glow, Evan shattered, collapsing against the steering wheel, body racked with heaves that tore at Samuel's soul. "I thought finding him would fix me. But it's you, always you." Samuel gathered him close, rain pattering on the roof like distant applause, their foreheads pressed in shared surrender. No words, just the steady thrum of hearts sinking, a quiet vow to redefine family on their terms. Summer healed in increments, the city a sweltering crucible forging something new. Samuel and Evan rebuilt boundaries. Love recast as brotherhood laced with the ache of what could have been, yet richer for the fire. They moved into Lila's brownstone, turning the attic into a shared studio. Evan sketching designs inspired by their scars, Samuel writing poetry that bled emotion onto pages. Dates became family dinners, laughter echoing where silence once reigned. Mia, ever the skeptic, thawed over rooftop barbecues, toasting to the most dramatic love triangle turned throuple ever. And in quiet moments, Evan's head on Samuel's shoulder during a Mets game, fingers interlaced under the stadium lights, Samuel felt the poetry of it. Love not as possession, but as expansive grace. By autumn's golden cusp, as they stood on the Coney Island boardwalk where Samuel's old heart had splintered, Evan turned to him, wind whipping their jackets. We didn't choose this mess, but we choose us, whatever shape that takes. Samuel nodded, pulling him into an embrace that held no hunger, only profound belonging. The ocean roared approval, waves crashing like applause for survivors. In the end, it wasn't a fairy tale's tidy bow, but a human mosaic, flawed, fierce, unbreakable. Samuel had loved a stranger, unearthed a brother, and in the alchemy of pain, discovered a family vast as the American dream itself, messy, resilient, eternally remaking itself under wide skies.